The title of this teaching is A Tongue is a Fire and Things to Avoid in Conversations. James chapter 3 and chapter 4. It's important to come to the knowledge that we all stumble in our words and we all make mistakes with our conversations. Nobody is perfect, but as long as we are guarding our mouth and keeping every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, we should be in good shape. And that's what 2 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 3 says. But we'll cover that in a second. Verse 1 of James 3. Let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such as we incur a strict judgment. For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, and able to bridle the whole body as well. Okay, in Matthew 5:48, it says, you to be perfect just as God the Father is perfect. But we all know that's impossible, because all of us has fallen short and stumbled in our conversations and our words. In verse 3, now if we put in the bit into the horse's mouth so that they may obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Verse 4, the very top. For behold, the ships also, they are so great and are driven by strong winds that are directed by a very small rudder. Whenever the inclination of the pilot desires, so also is the tongue, is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. Behold, how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. In other words, our tongue, it can be like a small spark that can create a large fire. With the tongue, you can go from a molehill into a mountain of problems. And with the tongue, you could actually offend someone in the world, a worldly person, and it could be your death. In verse 6, it says the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity, of sin. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body, set on fire the course of our life, and is set on fire by hell. And don't forget that Matthew 15, verse 7 says, that proceeds from the mouth comes from the abundance of the heart. And those words are jealousy, bitterness, unforgiveness, hate, slander, and so forth. These are the things that defile you. And so Jesus is letting us know right then and there that our heart could be wicked by the words of wickedness. And let's look at verse 7. You can also look at Isaiah 50 verse 11 for the tongue is a fire. But let's look at 7. For every species of beast and birds and reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by the human race. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison. Referring to our tongue. With our tongue we can bless the Lord, the Father, and with our tongue we can curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessings and curses. And we're looking at verse 10. My brethren, and it's referring to Christians, brethren, Christian, these things ought not to be this way. And we all stumble in this area, that we could bless God and raise our hands and praise the Lord, but then through our same mouth, we're cutting down and criticism and hatefulness and bitterness and unforgiveness about our neighbor, somebody maybe in the church, somebody in our family, maybe some friends, maybe at our job. But, when we curse our neighbor is made in the likeness of God. And we should not have blessed God but curse our neighbor. We need to be slow to speak, and we also be slow to judge. And we also need to guard our mouth, because David says in Psalms 50 through 55 that he said, I'd rather be silent and look dumb than to curse my neighbor. And that's where we need to be, is with our mouth. We need to guard our mouth with a muzzle to stop our mouth from saying anything. Let's look at 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but are divinely powerful for the destruction of fortress. We are destroying speculation and every lofty thing that raised up against the knowledge of God. We are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. It's important to see here that the weapons of our warfare are divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses and strongholds, and anything that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. So we're destroying speculation. It's very easy for us to come up with some evil imaginations or bad thoughts of our neighbor, but we need to keep our thoughts captive in obedience and not just speak with our mouth and stumble in our mouth and show our imperfections with our mouth. We need to keep every thought captive and carefulness with our speech. We are back in James, and we were looking at James 3:10, but now let's jump to chapter 4 of James. And the title of this is Things to Avoid. You can cross comparison with Jeremiah chapter 9, the whole book of Jeremiah 9. Okay, here's important verse. What is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? It's referring to how we talk to people. Is not the source of your pleasures that wage war in your members? Verse 2, you lust and do not have, you commit murder and you are envious and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel, and you do not have because you do not ask. Okay, these are things that people desire things from other people, get angry with jealousy, get very angry with our neighbors when our neighbor doesn't treat us fairly. If we feel like we're not being treated fair, there is anger, and so we commit murder. So anytime you see that word murder, it's referring to anger, because in Matthew 5 it says those who have anger with your neighbor is like committing murder. So you cannot obtain because you fight and quarrel. In verse 3, you ask and do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your desires and pleasures. Verse 4, you adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility towards God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. And this is where we read in Old Testament or Revelations. It says that the people are adulterous people. And what that means, adulterous people, is that their friendship with the world and they desire the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, boastful pride of life. And that's where they become double-minded, is that their friendship with the world. So let's move on. In verse 5, it says that, do you not know that the scripture speaks to no purpose? And very top here, he jealously desires the Spirit which he has made to dwell in us, but he gives a greater grace. Therefore it says, God is opposed to the proud, but give grace to the humble. In other words, we watch on television how there's experts that give their opinions, and it's politics or weather or religion or just news. But they always are very proudful, very arrogant, act like they know everything. And God resists those that are proud, that are prideful. And you see a lot of that on television, and especially in the media. And a lot of it's fake news. Submit therefore to God and resist the devil, and he will flee from you. And the devil will rise up in people. So you got to be on guard. You got to put on the full armor of God to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. Because the devil can work it through people and get you angry, or get you jealous, or get you envious, or get you upset at something. So you have to guard your thoughts, keeping every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, and keep your mouth from stumbling. In verse 8, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. And there again is the double-minded adulteress, being in friendship with the world and reacting in the flesh with anger or quarrels or conflicts or division or arguments. You can cross-reference that with Psalms 119 verse 113. But we are to make sure that we cleanse our hands from uncleanness in our hands and purify our hearts. Verse 9, be miserable and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning, and let your joy to gloom. Humble yourself in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you. Verse 11. In verse 11, we're reading probably one of the most important verses. Do not speak against one another. Speak, brethren, that's referring to Christian. He who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law of God. And the law of God is to love your neighbor as yourself, love God. But if you speak against your neighbor in a negative way all the time and got malicious gossip and hate, and bitterness, then you are being a judge of the law of God of loving your neighbor as yourself. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge of it. And when you look to Matthew 7, verse 1, it says, do not judge, for only God the Father judges. Who are you to judge? In Matthew 7, 1. Verse 12, there is only one lawgiver and judge, and the one who's able to save and destroy. But who are you who judge your neighbor? Today, we have many people that are quick to judge. If they read a blog or a posting on Facebook or elsewhere, and the blog or posting says this and this and this and this is about this person, like a celebrity or a person in politics or somebody we know. Well, if you don't research the evidence, you know what? You're judging. You're judging really quick there because it could be fake news. And a lot of today is fake news. So when you read something about somebody, don't be quick to judge somebody by what you read, because it could be a fake report, a fake news, gossip, bearing false witness. So we need to be careful how we judge. In verse 13, come now and say, today, tomorrow, we shall go to such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Verse 14, yet you do not know what life will be like tomorrow. You are, at the very top, just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and also do this or do that. But as it is, you boast in your own arrogance, and such boasting is evil. Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does it not, to him it will be a sin. So we have to be careful of how we come across as prideful or boasting or arrogant, because many people will look at it as evil. And we could also see that in the news and the media and television, how some of that arrogance and pride is just flat evil. And we should know and be slow to judge these people. Okay, well, this was very powerful 2 chapters on how we should be careful how we speak to our neighbor and judge our neighbor. God bless.